First, let's start with our top story. As European environment ministers gather in Luxembourg tomorrow, they have a blunt message to consider. In the words of one Greenpeace activist, time is running out and leaders need to, quote, act now, idiots. It is the most extensive warning yet on the risks of rising global temperatures. And commissioned at the Paris Climate Summit 3 years ago, it urges immediate large-scale change to prevent temperatures from rising above pre-industrial levels. And it puts the responsibility directly on politicians.
The message is over to governments at this stage. We've told you the scientific facts, the evidence, the costs. It is up to the governments now to decide what to do with it.
All right, this is not the first time we've heard the dire warning. I put it to you, Ameta, because you work with governments on how to communicate the message. Why is the message always falling flat?
Because it's very easy to communicate the big message. But what's actually needed when you have to address climate change affect normal people's lives. So it's very difficult to economically, and also some of these legislative proposals are just affecting people's life and economies. And it's very difficult as a politician to look at something that might have some effect in 40 years, but sell it now, because political reality is that it's reactive to today and tomorrow, not what's going to happen in 40 years.
But what's interesting is that we had such a summer with a lot of different weather patterns, extreme weather patterns, right? So why is there still a lack of, it seems, political will, despite the fact that we're seeing the effects of climate change?
Yes, I mean, I think this report is alarming. It should make us act. I mean, otherwise we'll end up in a situation with millions of climate displaced people, climate refugees, actually. And maybe that kind of narrative is striking, is more, let's say, getting some attention in the public. I think there's lack of political leadership, actually. I think the lobbyism in this house, the lack of businesses really taking on this big challenge that makes the public very left alone with this whole climate change issue. I think now is the time to forbid the use of fossil fuels, actually. By 2030, we should ban the use of fossil fuels because we have renewable energy, we have the alternatives there, and otherwise we'll see all of these people migrating, and it's a big catastrophe, I would say.
I think, Tessa, what's really interesting is, as you say, we've seen this extraordinary summer of weather patterns, extreme temperatures across lots of Europe. This almost certainly, to a degree, part of the climate change debate. And it is the failure of politicians, and to a degree of people like Greenpeace and the IPCC and others, to communicate that this is not something that's happening in 30 or 40 years' time. This is something that is now happening, and it is having an effect. This winter, all the peoples across Europe are paying more money for the food at the supermarkets. Exactly. The chips in Belgium, the frites in Belgium here are smaller because the potato crop has failed.
And we can do it quite easily. I mean, we're doing it already in Sweden, actually.
Right now.
Okay.
Right now.
All right. The European Commission, let's just bring this up, conducted a survey last year about climate change. And this is what it found. It found that 92% of respondents said they viewed climate change as a serious problem. 89% said they believed it was important for their national governments to set targets to increase renewable energy use by 2030. And 79% said that more public financial support should be given to the transition to clean energies. Now, there is a disconnect, isn't there, with what people are trying to say and what they're actually doing. I think, before I go to you, because Darren, you were talking to people today.
Yeah, I went out and about, and I was first of all speaking to Tara Conley. She's from Greenpeace, about what the report is and how significant it is, but also talking to people here on a seasonally warm October day, it must be said, in Brussels. And as you say, the main thing you glean from these discussions is that everyone says the environment is a really important issue. Clearly, it's not true for everyone because not everyone's voting on it, but people aren't necessarily willing to admit that they're not interested or concerned about the environment. Let's have a watch of the people I spoke to earlier on today.
Hello, we're talking about the environment. Mm-hmm. Have you seen the report today?
No, I haven't.
No, so, well, you can explain what does the report say?
It says we have to do a lot more to tackle climate action, also in Europe.
Why do you think people aren't listening, or politicians aren't listening?
Other interests, perhaps? Economic interests?
You know these reports, Greenpeace have got a report out today about the environment and we need to tackle climate change. Do you think people are listening?
I don't. Maybe some of them yes, but not everybody. I think people. I don't know. I think a lot of people doesn't care because we continue to take these cars and everything.
Are you listening?
Yes, I listen. I take the metro and everything, but when I need my car, I don't have any choice. But that's it.
Isn't that the problem, that in reality lots of people want to do more but they actually can't?
Yeah, and that's where, individual action also meets, government action. So governments doing more to make the choices easier for people to take the bus and the metro is something that's incredibly important.
Do you think politicians are listening or acting enough?
Probably not enough, unfortunately. But I think it's becoming more and more important, and politicians are also listening more and more.
And you're suggesting that people need to have a kick up the ass. What do you mean by that?
I mean that people have talked about climate change for a long time. We sort of know the science, we know the facts, but I think today the report has really laid it out on the table how badly we're doing on climate change and how much better we and also especially governments need to do in tackling climate change.
Europe, though, relative to the rest of the world, isn't in a bad place. But what more does the European Union kind of need to do?
I mean, historically, Europe is responsible for about 25% of historical emissions, so we have that responsibility. We also like to claim a lot of climate leadership, and I think that's something we need to live up to. We need to play a positive role in the international negotiations, and we need to remember that we're also doing this for ourselves. I mean, we've had this summer of tragic forest fires, devastating droughts. We need to recognise that this is also in our own best interest.
I'll go to you, Mette, for this one because, we heard what people were saying. That, they say they are concerned, perhaps. In terms of messaging, is there a disconnect between, maybe people think that going green means giving up some parts of their standard of living?
Well, exactly, but there absolutely is a disconnect between the higher political goal and then when you have one pot of money that needs to be distributed and it has to go to infrastructure and social welfare and everything else. And what costs votes? It costs when you take away benefits from people. This just costs political votes, and that's the reality. So do you take away from social welfare and put into green investments? Well, we can all argue that at some point it's all part of the same ecosystem, but it's just very difficult.
So how do politicians weigh that?
No, but I think it's possible to do this transformation and quite rapidly as well, because we have to do it in just a couple of years, actually, in order to meet our targets. So in my home country, Sweden, we are basically 100% fossil-free, except from the transport sector, which we need to...
But you think Sweden is probably an exception at the moment?
Yes, but I mean, there are vulnerable member states. Let's be honest, we have member states who are on a very, very difficult path in order to reach a fossil-free welfare state, let's say. But that's why we have the European Union. That's why we have the European project, to be in solidarity with each other and help each other towards this path. What we need is political leadership once more, and to be able to see it's possible. Let's look at the good examples and let's do it now.
But to Mette's point, how would you say that to countries that don't even have enough money for their social services, for their basic needs?
Yes.
How would you sell that?
I think the European Commission has done a pretty good job in saying that, energy efficiency, for example, so how you insulate your houses or how you produce these kind of electric devices. So 50% of how different member states meet their targets should come from energy efficiency. And that's a very powerful tool as well. So, and let's be honest, we still could do a lot in the European Union to be more solidaric in sharing our renewable resources.
And I think politicians do need to be a bit, people need to be a bit more grown up. That this isn't a case of having your cake and eat it, a phrase we use very often in this programme, but that people will have to give things up, that it is not sustainable to consume what we do as we do, and think that that is not going to have long-term consequences. And I do think that this summer, actually, with the wildfires that we saw in Sweden, actually, and in Portugal, the opinion may well be changing on this.
Okay, but it's also
people are feeling this much more immediate to them.
But it's also about security, because right now we're importing massive amounts of oil and gas from Russia. I mean, how secure are we feeling in the European Union when we're so dependent on, dictatorship or this kind of states where they have immense atrocities against their own population. So it's also a matter of phasing out these fossil fuels to become more secure.
So do you think that, the final question, do you think that the messaging is ready when the reality might not be ready? So how can you have a message when Linnea is bringing up other issues that still need to be solved?
Well, I think you'd have to address the whole thing, but I also think you need to pick 4 instead of 15 issues that you need to address at the same time, and then go a little bit step by step. Might not see the effect of it immediately, but at least we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, you've got that report.
I should just add that we've managed today to get hold of a leaked report. This is going to be published at the end of November by the Commission about its target it's going to reach for 2050. I can tell you, Tessa, there is a big disagreement within the Commission about whether it is to be neutral by 2050 or to get rid of 80%.
Right.
And at the moment, it appears it is not, even though Jean-Claude Juncker supports it, it is not necessarily being 100% neutral.
We'll
winning.
have probably another panel when this one gets
But
out.
we don't have any choice, right? I mean, we have to do it.
Thank you to our guests.